Hello and welcome to another Coffee with Developers. Today I'm meeting a friend of mine who's actually stateside, so he's in America. And I think that's why it's late night here and the lighting isn't as good as it's supposed to be. But that means nothing, because if you see lighting of Aaron, then you will see that my lighting is actually quite pretty.
A little blinding you over there, huh? A little bit. Need some different curtains. Life's not too bad here in sunny California.
Yeah, I mean, it's Berlin here. It's like we got snow and everything. And at the same time, the trains are on strike. So that's actually a double whammy. So that's quite fun to do as well. So what does the T stand for? Please say it's Tiberius.
If only. Unfortunately, just Thomas, but you know.
Cool. Yeah. So you're a web performance optimization specialist, which is quite a mouthful. And as far as I understand, you're currently looking for a job, right?
Yes. I was working with Estee Lauder for about 3, almost 4 years, and some reduction in forces put me back on the market. So been looking around, done a lot of reading and writing, and a few different places. So looking right now.
So how long you been there?
I think almost 4 years.
Yeah.
I started right before I left Germany, and then the whole time I've been in California. So, yeah.
It was really weird because when I left my last job, everybody was like, if you stay longer than 3 years at a company, they keep seeing this as a detriment. They basically see you like, oh, so you wanted to stay with one company and you're not interested in doing cool shit for the market anymore. Is that something that what kind of prejudices are you currently feeling when you're applying for jobs? Like, what are the things that people throw towards you when they say no?
Yeah, I feel like, well, first of all, I'm not a big React person. And so if you're not doing, I mean, like 90+% of the jobs easily say must be a master, excellent expertise at React. So that's the first thing that probably gets me a little bit of a ding. I used to hear the same thing even when I was in New York. I was working at People Magazine's website and was with a cast of really, really fantastic people. I think you probably know Anna Gringhaus as well.
Yep.
It's a name from the past. And she and I worked there together, and she had a great team of engineers, and a lot of the people there were just in for a year and gone, in for a year and gone. And I used to hear the same thing then, but I average 5 years at a gig, and I don't seem to mind that. If the place is working for me and it's a good job and I feel like I'm contributing something, it's not like you can't learn in place. You know, I'm pretty much of a nerd when it comes to reading, so I love scouring the web, looking for something cool to do, some new way of doing something, and so I feel like there's enough exposure on a day-to-day that if your eyes are open, you're going to be exposed to all the great new things. And if you find something that you like, there's no reason you can't figure out some way to do it, whether it's at work or in your personal life. I often have like side projects going on, and I was always shocked at how often the side project, I'd be working on something really cool, and then something would come up at work, and I'd say like, oh, that same thing could work here. And I'd find it would work the other way too. Sometimes I'll be doing something at work, and then all of a sudden a side project would come up and say, I could use that same thing here. So that kind of synchronicity or zeitgeist or whatever it is, sometimes it just pops in life for you.
That's where ownership comes in. That's interesting. I found out the hard way working for American companies that if you use company hardware for your side projects, that is actually a legal issue, and that the code that you write on hardware that is owned by a company is owned by the company, no matter what you do. And it feels really bizarre. Like, I mean, I did things like put up a VM on the computer, and then like technically it was not on that machine then. And like, it was just weird things you have to jump through. But let's talk about the thing that you asked me to contribute to, and I didn't have time. That's why I thought I'd get you on the podcast first before I sent lots of stuff your way. You have a project called NoLoJS. What the heck is that about?
It's kind of near and dear to me, and it speaks a little bit to the performance. I've always, from very early on, I was always like, the first time I discovered HTML, these letters and brackets, and I thought, oh, this is really cool. And I started playing with it. And then CSS, I started digging into everything, that originally was like adding stuff right in line with attributes and width and height and all that. And I started getting into CSS, and I thought this is really cool. And then JavaScript. And as I started learning all the different pieces, I was learning that, well, this is for that, this is for that, this is for that. And then as I watched the web and engineers kind of develop, they sort of, I felt like they were meshing it together. And I know, whatever works best for any situation is what should work, is what you should use, I think. But at the same time, I like the separation of concerns. I like keeping things light. I like using what's natively provided. If the HTML is going to give you functionality, why are you going to add all this extra CSS to do something or JS to do something? Why don't you just let the HTML do it? So as I've been watching CSS and HTML just like go explode in the last few years, I started seeing a lot of patterns that have typically been very JS reliant, very heavy JS. And most of them started out that way because you couldn't do it in straight up HTML and CSS. But as these new capabilities come in and browsers are packing them up and baselines are jumping from newly to limited to widely available, I'm starting to see like, it seems like there's a lot of opportunities to pull back that JS a little bit and reduce it a little bit and see if we can't do stuff with just native HTML and CSS. And the idea is, the tagline I'm using is, I have nothing against JavaScript, but it has better things to do than to manage your accordions and nav menus. And the idea is, if something can be done without it, why not go ahead and do it without it? And from a performance perspective, from a DTX perspective, it means the developer has to write less JavaScript and maintain less JavaScript, keep less JavaScript up to date. From a network, that's less stuff that has to be built during the build process and shipped. There's less stuff that needs to be shipped across the company's network. There's less stuff to be downloaded by the user, less stuff to be processed and maintained and monitored by the browser. And so I just feel like this is a win if you can get people's sort of perspective changed a little bit. And I think that's the biggest challenge is people tend to reach for the tool that they know best. And if you've got a JS thingy that does what you need and you know how to do that, it's probably what you're going to grab first. You're not going to, a lot of times you don't have the time to sit and figure out a new thing and look up the way it can work and figure out all the ins and outs and tricks and that. And so as I started playing with these ideas, I was sort of documenting stuff for myself of, oh, that's a cool pattern. That's a cool way to do this. Oh, look at that. We can do this now. And so then I started thinking of like, well, where can I start keeping these in a place that isn't just like some random TXT file or something in my own hard drive. And so I started throwing stuff up on GitHub just to try and keep a collection of it. And then it just started becoming this design library, pattern library in a way. And so, of course, you have to have a cool name for things. And so the NoLoJS kind of fed itself into me as I was writing about it. Oh, there's a bunch of patterns to use no or low.js. And I thought, okay, that kind of has a ring to it. So yeah, so I just started playing with it. And as I shared it with a few people, they were excited by the concept. And the more I played with it, the more fun it was to go in there and figure out how can I do this. And there's a lot of it that's built out for the modern browsers, all the best ones that are in the best shape, the Chromes and that can do everything really well. The part that's kind of missing that I still need to go in and add in a bit is some of the backfill, the polyfill stuff, so that if there's a browser that doesn't support the two arrows for a CSS carousel with the dots below, and if those are important, then you might need to add some stuff with JS. But you know, that's the low portion of JS in there. So yeah, so it just seemed like a fun project, and it's been fun to go in and do. It's a lot of work, but it's educational, and as I said, I'm a nerd. I love playing with this stuff.
So, I mean, we all know the reasons why JavaScript is a bad idea at times. It's basically flaky. One error could mean nothing gets rendered. Like it is overhead, and but we set this for. I mean, I think I was together on stage with people like 10 years ago saying the same thing, 20 years ago saying the same thing. Like, Here's a button. It actually is keyboard accessible and mouse accessible. You don't have to do that by hand. But it seems there was this push for people that they wanted to do it themselves and wanted to prove that they can write a scroll bar, and at the same time not using the other one, using Internet Explorer 6 as an excuse. I think by the time that most people said that, it was already dead, long time. Like so, when you're talking about like the browser space moving much faster these days, I think the polyfill bit, I cooled on it. I like the idea of polyfills when they're proper polyfills, like when they only get loaded and applied when the thing was not possible to do. But that was sometimes really tricky, especially with Safari and some browsers, to say like, can you do this? And then it said maybe. I mean, my favorite is the video API, the W3C HTML5 video API. It can play through. One of the returns is maybe or probably, and you're like, I don't want an API that's coy with me, like that. Yeah. So that kind of messaging in the standards bodies and also in the documentation seems to me pushed a lot of people into the JavaScript and framework camp. Do you think we've overdone it with the like granular control over everything? Like back in the days when we wanted to do like local storage, we said like, okay, we had like one file that was more or less like an htaccess that actually pointed to things. It was completely broken. That's totally true. But then we did like web workers and service workers, and holy crap, looking through that documentation, I feel overwhelmed. And I'm like, I didn't want to read a library, or I didn't want to build a library. I just want to do some local storage things. So people go for next abstraction. Do you think this is a fight that is really hard to fight these days? That people are just used to doing an npm install as the first thing for a web thing?
I do. I said earlier, I think it's, if you've got a tool that you know how to use, the natural tendency is to grab it, because that's what's going to get you where you want to get to fastest. And often when you're working and the boss says this needs to be done by this time, fastest is the only thing that matters. And so there, I think, ideally everything is viewed in tones of gray, and you say, we've all been there where you need to get something done now. And so you do what you need to do to get it out. If you have a chance to go back and revisit it, that's awesome. If you have another project you're working on where you have some breathing time to figure out new and interesting ways of doing something, maybe that's when you go and play. And then maybe next time when you're in a hurry, you've got a new tool in your belt that instead of grabbing the old crusty one, you can grab the new shiny one, because now you're comfortable with that too. And I think it's a little bit of what I was hoping that this NoLoJS design pattern library thing would be, is it would be something where if you wanted to do a CSS carousel, for example, I've got, I think, 6 or 8 different varieties of options of ways you can do different things with it. And each example in here, I'm trying to keep all of the markup at an absolute minimum. There's no stylistic stuff. There's no colors. There's no, I don't even think there's margins or that type of thing. It's all just meant to be the most purest, simplest. Each HTML file is literally just the HTML that you need for that component. There's no doc type, head, body, any of that. And the idea I had was, it'd be cool if somebody needed something and they could just go in here, grab the HTML, plop it in, grab the CSS, plop it in, and you're 75, maybe 80% of the way there. You need to add your branding, you need to add the padding, maybe your custom fonts, so that but if you're sticking it into a true cascading system, there should be a lot of stuff that just paints right over it and applies your branding and all of that CSS type of stuff as well. And so I think, again, it's just a matter of, I think, getting comfortable with different tools, and you're not always able to do that, but when you can, it's great to try it out. And if this could help make it a little easier sometimes, give you a couple steps in the right direction, then maybe that's cool.
That was always the frustrating bit when I build things like that as well. I kept them very much unstyled and say, like, here's the 5 classes you can use. Here's the inheritance that you can use from your body anyway. So why would I have another font in there? But then people are now in a component world where they just want everything in there. And everything that was successful, highly successful in the, not even in the developer space, but in the developer news space that people talked about, were opinionated things that had pre-built shiny looking bits. It seems like when you offer things, when you offer customizable components to people think you didn't do the job and they just don't want to go that extra step.
Yeah, it looks not ready, ironically, although it's actually more ready, because if, there's a lot of times examples you see where you go and somebody's got something really sussed out and is beautiful and great. I plugged that into my system, but now I have to go in and rip all these bits out or override something to make it fit into what I'm trying to do. The very first open source thing I ever did for the web, this was back when Paul Irish and Divya came up with HTML5 boilerplate. And at the time I was just getting started into WordPress, and I thought, well, WordPress is missing all this cool stuff, all the IE comments at the top to figure out what version you're in and all that stuff. It's like, these are all so useful. So I built a theme called HTML5 boilerplate, and I basically started out with, I can't remember what the starter theme was, something like naked or something like that. And it was basically a super stripped down theme. It had no opinions whatsoever. And I think it was Paul that recommended I use that one because I started out with 2020, I think. And, or whatever it was back then. And so I took this really naked theme and I just went in and peppered these bits around it. And that was the most common comment I got on all of it was, man, I think your site's broken. I don't see, it looks like CSS. Is it supposed to look like this? Why doesn't it have any style? Oh, this guy has no imagination. He can't come up with the design. It's like, if you just read the words, this will all make sense. And it's so much easier if you take this, put a child theme with your own CSS, and wow, everything just, falls into place. But
the first time I really fell from grace and I was just putting my head on the desk and thinking what happened here is when people started making CSS solutions and then packing them up as npm packages and saying, do npm install for this CSS package? And I'm like, how does that make any sense? But it seems to be like a common way of distributing bits and bobs nowadays. So it's like, I mean, Gulp used to be something like that before, and like before that we had like unpackage is still an interesting thing to put to put things for people to reuse. But it feels so over architected everything. When you just said I'm using WordPress for my blog as well because I've hacked it since 2006 and I probably can't shift anymore. Although Lea Varou wrote this great thing about how to turn it into 11T, so I might be doing that soon. But because every 2 days WordPress tells me to update all the inbuilt templates that I'm not using. Like, why are they there? Like, it seems like a lot of as a web performance person, it seems like there's a lot of cruft being thrown at us because of the systems that we use. And I'm quite sure a lot of engineers know how to make things better and make them faster, but they don't even have access to it because as soon as they do, somebody in the marketing team puts a tag manager on top of it, and out of a sudden you got 50 more JavaScript files.
Yeah. I think it's sort of the bane of what we always deal with is the build it or buy it, right? Is sure, when you can grab it, you need to make something swipey. Okay. You can just go, now it's easy to do that with NoLoJS. But if you needed that, you had this debate. Do I sit and write this myself and figure out how to make buttons and swipe and different devices and make sure it's responsive and all the different devices and test it everywhere? Or do I just grab some JS library, lazy sizes, throw it in there, and it does everything for me? But more often than not, it does everything you need and 75 other things as well. So then you now have to spend the time to actually figure out how the library wants you to do it. So it's this, it's that battle of which is faster, which is more future-proof. If you grab some open source library, they're going to stop maintaining it, and now you're stuck with something. But it always seems to come with more stuff than you need, and that's the challenge. Is how do you get rid of that? Was the big problem when we were both around when jQuery first came around the corner, and what a monumental feat of engineering that was. But I remember looking at it and thinking, there's so much here that we don't need. And then things like eventually like builder screen sort of came out with was it jQuery UI, I think, had like a builder. You could go in and say, I need that, I need that, I need that. I don't need all the rest of it. And sometimes it would throw in some kind of a dependency bit that you needed if you chose something that needed it. But you could really tailor what you needed about it, you know. And that I thought was pretty slick. Obviously, that's a lot of tooling that not everybody's going to build in. And of course, you run the risk now of somebody new coming in and thinking, oh, you got jQuery UI, then of course I could just do this, even though maybe it wasn't included. So I think it's a challenge every time you're going to use somebody else's thing, you know.
I worked on YUI back then, and we had all of that because it was actually an enterprise architecture thing. It was Java developers writing a JavaScript environment. And the idea was that basically we even the playground, we just do away with all the browser issues that you don't have to think about. And it was a Yahoo config file. There was a yahoo.config. And if that was not a global variable, then you could lazy load the rest of it and each of it and everything. It was just beautifully done. And so complex that nobody gave a crap and everybody just included jQuery and instead used that. And then also used jQuery to create one event handler for every link in the document rather than doing the event delegation. Like this shortening, we always have this like, here's a shorter way of writing it. And then people unlearn what it actually means to optimize the code that gets generated at the end of it. Emmet is another great example. Like I know people that write only in Emmet or in Nunchuck or whatever, and it's just like there's always this like, why is HTML so scary? I mean, in 1996 when I put an input element in a page and I was like, this is a box that people can type in. That's fucking amazing. I wouldn't know how to do that.
But I think that's the challenge. That's every tool, though, right? I mean, the very first IDE I ever used was Notepad. Probably you too, or something similar. And I remember the first time somebody tried to convince me to go to this thing that does all your tabs and does all this formatting and closes your tags. I'm like, oh, that's just lazy. I'm a purist. And boy, the first time I used it and didn't have to deal with the tabbing and all that, and then I just never went back to that. And so I think it's just it's tools, and sometimes it works better. I don't use Emmet a lot because honestly I have trouble thinking that far ahead. Like, what am I really going to need 12 elements deep? But if I know what I need, it's super. A lot of time in CodePen I'll use it just because I have a good idea of, for this component, what I'm trying to templatize here. And so being able to say this times that with lorem and all that, and hit tab and it does it for me. That's beautiful. I know, especially if you're on like the German keyboard where you're trying to write the opening and closing brackets is a lot more challenging, scrunched up on the left-hand side. It's sometimes more difficult, but
why would you do that to yourself? I mean, like I'm German. I lived in England for 16 years, in America for a few, and I just basically don't look at my keyboard. I have a German keyboard right now because that's the laptop my company paid me for, but I have turned it to British English, so I don't look at the keys. So, but yeah, I mean, first time you use a French keyboard or a Swedish one, then you really, really want to go and live in the woods.
I guess you're one of those people that knows where the keys are on a keyboard. I'm still 30 years later in this industry. I'm still working on where keys are. So. Learning to type is the greatest missing in my repertoire.
Well, I got like a 7.5 finger system. It's not touch type either, but it somehow worked. I mean, the whole QWERTY layout was basically so that typewriters wouldn't block up. So it makes no sense that we use this any longer, but we're just used to it by now, I guess.
Yeah.
So, do you have any demo that you could quickly show us? Like, what are you really excited about in your Nolo thing that basically you thought?
I can kind of share the repo, I guess.
Oh, there you go.
So it's as I said, it's just a standard GitHub rehub. I'm on GitHub. I am almost anywhere you look. If I'm on it, it's Aaron T. Grogg, one word, all shoved together. And then this is no different. And the NoLoJS repo is available from my main GitHub page. Within this, there's a slew of options. Most of them, for example, the accordion has a few variations within here. Each one has, each top level has a README, and if it's maybe known as something else, the idea is that maybe this makes it more search friendly within GitHub. Usually a really small explainer, and then different options. At the moment, everything is NoJS. I haven't added any JS polyfills or anything to any yet. It's kind of a next level step. It does baseline if there's something that is not what I consider probably standardly available. I do add the link to the web status dev project baseline so that somebody could quickly find out. Initially, I was putting in here on all of them what the current status was. And then I realized that that is not going to be maintainable for me. And then every single option, in addition to being able to click in and see the HTML that's in there, the really basic accordion doesn't even require CSS, right? It's just the details with a summary. And as I said, I tried to keep those as absolute simple as possible. It explains what's happening in here. And so that's that. There's also below every single one has a code pen. So this then it has in here, it actually, I use one code pen for all of the examples that were in there. And so you've got the HTML, I explain a little bit of what it is. There's some CSS just to make, this does have stuff to try and make it look a little bit pretty. And then you get down to where the actual example is. This talks about when you want to animate the opening and close, etc. And so there's just all these examples in there where you can actually see it working. It talks about this one's initially open, and then you can close it. This one uses the name attribute so that you can only have one open at a time. This one has the animate to it, and this one I think it's the marker. The little arrow turns on this one. So they all have this pattern. Every example in here. All four of the ones we just looked at are here, and most of the top levels do have several variations within it. As I mentioned, the CSS carousel has however many that is. And so it's fairly easy to just walk through. Everything has a code pen to it, so you can actually see it working. I do have a demo page that I'm slowly kind of building out.
I just saw the AWIF, and for a second I thought it was a SWF, and I'm like, wait, you got a flash fallback? Like what?
In case the time traveler shows up, I like to be prepared. That was
wow.
That's another great one. The days of how can we make things so much easier, but let's see if I can get that to up. So this is a fairly simple page, but it bakes into a lot of the examples. And so as you scroll, we've got the header, the logo shrinks down and it becomes small. There's zero JS on this page. It's got you notice there's no shadow here, but as you start scrolling, the shadow comes in. So it's scroll animation. This whole carousel is all CSS, including the little icons down here. The tabs here is all just CSS. So that's kind of fun. This scrolly slider, the parallax in here might not come through on the video very well, but all the so this is just me trying to play with some things and see what I can do, what I can't do. And it's a nice place to just show off some of the examples.
And the fun bit, as it is, there's no dependencies. You can just fork the thing and use it offline.
Absolutely.
That's the other good thing about it, yeah.
Yeah, and so this is, so it's just a fun little playground for me. So there's not a lot to view here. That was one of the other reviewers, Jeremy, looked at it for me and said, it'd be nice if there was a way for people to see each of the components more in action. And so I've been looking around for a good example. I was hoping just straight up GitHub pages would get me where I was looking for, but to get that, you've got to get into Jekyll, and there's a bunch of customization you have to make to everything to make all that flow in and look nice. I've been looking at Storybook, which gets pretty close to what I'd really love to have. I would love if there was a way that it really just mimicked the structure of this. Like you had a menu that had all of these on it, and each one you clicked into would show each of the code blocks that are in there and a working example. So that's something I'm continuing to play with. And I've got a whole probably 20 different tabs of things that I want to add to it, different components that would be nice. And as I said, for the ones that, like the CSS carousel, the ones that really, if you wanted to use it, the tabs, for example, if you look at that one, looks beautiful in Chrome, works great in Chrome, but anything else, it's just a box and there are no tabs. So it's totally, completely useless. But I think there's not necessarily that everything, this is another hallmark of, I think, progressive enhancement web, is not everything needs to look and function exactly the same everywhere. If you can get it close, that's great. Maybe on some devices, instead of 3 tabs, maybe they're just 3 stacked boxes, and maybe that should be a good enough solution. So I think it might depend on if you can polyfill it and just how much is necessary to do that. So that's another level to play with, but that's the goal, is to make these as copy pastable as possible for people, but not something that is so such a steep learning curve that people can't learn from it. I would really love for this to be like a learning space where people could go in and look at it and see, oh, that's cool. And it is open source. It is an open GPL license. I would love contributions, whether issues, pull requests, anything that would help build this. If there's a top level that you think, oh, there's a variation that you didn't have in there, I'd love to see that kind of stuff added to it. So as we go down, there's a bit more explainer down here. There's some nice resources here from, again, back, Christina Silver was the earliest I could find somebody talking about that, almost 10 years ago now. But a few articles, and I borrowed from some of these. These are some quite old, so some of the methods are a bit passé now. Also mentioned, I know you had Theo on here recently, and he's an absolute fanboy, everything he's doing. I don't know if you know Ustav Mina also puts out a ton of great stuff. This is a list I'd like to grow. I do give a little kudos to, I was really far into this before I tripped across another repo called You Don't Need JavaScript, and it's got a absolute ton of examples. The documentation for each one isn't great, and the code for each one has a bit more code than I really wanted. So I figured, well, you can't have too many of these kind of resources. So, and there's a bit here on contributing if somebody wanted to contribute. So I think that's
one thing we did in the past for that was basically then to wrap it as templates for editors, like Visual Studio Code. Like I could type like carousel and I would get the code kind of thing. That would be that's the thing to do. And that of course brings us to vibe coding and assisted AI coding and these kind of things. And I just build a few random things for myself lately, and it just cracks me up how they get I don't know where they got the information from, but I mean, basic things like make a search form, not a single label inside. Like, make something. And my favorite was like generating something and writing, say like, oh, here's search form. Suppose everything was divs, and then like the JavaScript it generated said like search div. The variable was called search div. So using the wrong element and then hard coding the wrong element into the JavaScript to make sure you can never change it to what it's supposed to be.
Right.
Like naming JavaScript references to the DOM with the name of the HTML element is just I don't know who was drunk at 3 a.m. and put that on Stack Overflow and then basically Copilot indexed it.
Right,
but
right.
We talked about this earlier. Your main reason why you want to do this is, of course, performance as well, like resilience, but also performance. Like the thing can't break, and that was always the problem with CSS only solutions. I always didn't like that term when people did blog posts. This is a CSS only carousel, and you're like, well, it needs HTML as well. And if you're basically abusing checkboxes that you hide off screen to get some functionality that is not built into the component, it always felt hacky, and it felt very reliant on the browser at the time. Like there's a lot of CSS only solutions that work in my case, Netscape 4, and in other cases, IE 10, and that basically don't work anymore anywhere, and they don't fall. I mean, we always praise JavaScript, HTML and CSS as being able not to break. But I think CSS has become so complex that by now we can build broken things in CSS as well, right?
For sure, if something isn't like widely available, there's all kinds of articles that, granted, they're written with the intent of pushing the envelope, and that's fine. But CSS functions are coming out, starting scope. There's a lot of view transitions. There's a lot of CSS that you can write that simply is not going to work everywhere. The CSS carousel, the tabs that we just looked at, those do not work everywhere. But I think that's up to us to figure, these, I would hope these articles are being written to just kind of show these are possibilities, these are coming. If you get people excited about it, maybe we all go in and check that box on the next interop voting, or try to help contribute, or maybe we write something to help fill that in where it doesn't work. But ideally, as professionals, we're checking our stuff and making sure what works where, what doesn't. But yeah, I mean, it just that's the game, isn't it? We're writing the next thing, and it's I think the part of it when it isn't explicitly stated about how this might not work everywhere, it kind of smells of like just sort of clickbaity, like get everybody excited about something, and then I always find it frustrating when I get into an article somebody writes about this great way to do something, and they get all the way to the very end of it and it says, oh, by the way, this doesn't work anywhere on the web yet, but one day it will, or something to that effect. It's like, okay, well, put that right on top. Let me just start with that pre-concept so I don't get too excited here.
Yeah, the Adam Argyle posts like, oh, here's my nightly build of Chromium that you have to put these 15 flags on, and then you can see it happening, and you're like, okay, great, like excellent.
Yeah.
But I mean, having worked on Edge, it was just so frustrating to see how low the download numbers of preview browsers are. Like, we really think we do a service to the developer community out there, but nobody cares. Nobody downloads that thing except for a few freaks that write like libraries or continuous integration things or these kind of things. But it's really frustrating to see that we fought a lot in the beginning 2000s for that. Browsers were black holes. We had no idea what browsers were doing, where they're going to go next. Firefox was the beacon that basically made everything open. But still, it was just like, why can't we rely on things? But the thing why people went to JavaScript was because you could test and see if it happened. In CSS, you always had to rely on CSS to do it. But now with like add supports and if statements and stuff, we can actually write even more resilient CSS than before.
Yeah.
But
the add support to me was one of the best things that ever got written into. And you can actually test for something instead of just hacking around it. In the old days where you had to write one margin for everybody and then an underscore margin for IE something, or all the hacks we used to have to use to try and figure out how to trick that browser into doing kind of the wrong thing. But now the at support is another bit that I think is huge to be able to add into libraries like this, where you can say, do this where you can, that prefers reduced motion, all of these type of checks and balances, I think are great stuff for us now that we have this ability to add these feature checks in to be a little bit more open, inclusive, I guess would be the right way to say it. It's sort of building accessibility into CSS, which is really nice. So I'm happy to see that.
So as a performance expert, do you see that the complexity of CSS is becoming an issue in terms of performance? I mean, you can write CSS to really, really slow down a website nowadays. That was never the case before, except when you included 5,000 fonts.
Yeah, I think you could. You could, back in the day, you could write super long, silly selectors. You could, but yeah, I know your point is, it was harder to do it back then to have any real effect. Now, I think most of the animations, I guess, would be the biggest thing you would write to do something like that. I haven't played with like the if functions and that type of thing. I assume that they would be pretty optimized. The browsers tend to optimize, I would think, for that kind of thing. So I think I've seen some absolutely nuts animations where, you know, you've got custom properties and they're changing with each. It's like looping through and changing for all the nested children, and every nth child is a different something. And I'm thinking like, God, that just seems bonkers. I hope nobody's doing that in reality. I'm hoping that that's something you're just playing with to see how far can I take this experiment. But I guess, again, if we're checking our work, we would know if that's a problem. And if we're not checking it, hopefully our users are, and our usability is telling us. I haven't tracked much CSS stuff that really causes a big problem. But I think the really advanced stuff, you're just not really seeing on a lot of big scale production sites either. You know, I haven't seen much view transitions. I haven't seen view transition was something that I've been meaning to look back into this. When they first came out and you could do multi-page view transitions where you're naming same elements and you would transition, and you know, the small image on a category page would transition to the main image on a detail page, that type of thing. Looks absolutely brilliant on the demo. What I was finding was it was really killing LCP on a page, because what's happening in the background at that time anyway is when you hit navigate, the browser takes essentially a snapshot and freezes that on the page, downloads the new page, figures out what the transition needs to be, writes it all out, and then transitions to that. And so that was a really big delay for that next page to show up. I was wanting to look in to see how speculation rules could play into that, whether that would help get that next page in faster, whether that's something that the browsers have kind of built in. But there still has to, if you're doing these transitions, there still has to be a bit of delay while you're just waiting for the next page to get in and for the animations to get mapped and sort of planned out by the browser. So there could be that type of thing.
I've seen has and is selectors being like very, very heavy. So in terms of memory consumption. So that was one thing that I saw. But again, it's like I mean, we give people a code gun and they can shoot their foot, or they can do something good with it. Like that's basically what we do with standards. But it's fascinating. There, I mean, the CSS Chris Coyer thing about like video playing during page transitions, that there is a delay because of that load. That was another issue. One of my favorite things I've seen lately, which I'm going to have in the live show on Wednesday, and then this in 2 days from now, recording here, and also in the newsletter, is the where somebody put an image, a video inside a detailed summary to lazy load it. And using autoplay, which is like no, never use autoplay. But then I realized, okay, this time we use autoplay with an after a user action, and that's actually pretty clever.
Yeah, that was brilliant. I like that pattern a lot. I had to stop and think about that for a minute. Like, is this kosher? And it's you know, trying to think of the semantic value of this, like a detail for, and so in my own head, I initially thought, well, the detail is, the summary is meant to be like a summary of what's inside the detail. And if it's a screenshot of a video that's inside the detail, that is kind of that, isn't it? I mean, it's almost like it's a thumbnail for what's really in there. So it is kind of a summary. And yeah, I like that a lot. I thought that was an elegant way to do that. Definitely thinking outside the box in a way.
Yeah, but my problem also, and I said this in a few other shows and podcasts already, is like how the good people of the web, the ones that want to use semantics, that care about accessibility, that care about CSS, are always just really, really fast in shooting things down in flame when somebody builds something like that. I remember when summary and detail came out and modals came out and people used them for accordions, and that there were like 2 or 3 accessibility experts that would just crying havoc and basically saying like, no, you should never do it that way. This is first of all, never use carousels. People don't want them. People don't need them. And like, I mean, we're not good at selling web standard solutions to people by showing people the warts and the problems all the time. Whereas like the bootstrap people out there just basically throw the thing out there and say like, it's magic, it does everything for you.
Right.
But do you think there is a tendency that we're overzealous in making it absolutely perfect?
Sure, some people probably. But I think you need that, right? You need the watchguards, the vanguards out there that are fighting the good fight. And there's certainly performance, accessibility. There are lots of fields out there that feel like we're in the wild. We're in the wild out there. You know, we're the nuts that are out there screaming and jumping up and down, saying, you know, the end is nigh, and we have to fight this fight while everybody else is like, just wrap another div in a thing and we'll put it up there. And I think it's, you know, you need that little bit of pull to get people aware of it and thinking about it, and ideally people cognizant of it, so that maybe we can say, okay, well, what can we do? And I can't remember who I had this conversation. Steve Faulkner, I think. We were talking about something, and I said, well, I had asked, and I don't remember if I ever got an answer about, one of the things was the abbreviation tag. I've loved that tag since it first came out. Well, not first came out, since I first discovered it and learned about it. And so I used it everywhere. Everywhere I was typing an abbreviation, I was bracket, ABR, title, but type a whole thing up, bracket, you know, and because I think I'm doing my good accessibility thing. And then I get this article that says, don't ever use those things. None of the accessibility, none of the screen readers use them. It's really it doesn't do any good. It's not any help. And I was like, why not? This is a
it still doesn't cost anything. It's still an HTML element. That's a hook for CSS. That's a hook for JavaScript if need be. I mean, acronym tag as well, like not supported everywhere, but I always found it very clever to basically have like a little underline on acronyms that when you hover over it, explains to you what the thing is. But I mean, that's a totally different fight, I think. And I had that when I worked in browsers, because in Microsoft, we cannot release anything if it's not 100% accessible in all the test environments that we have. And those were all the different screen readers with every other browser. And some of the screen readers have been updated in like 16 years. Like engineers are probably dead. And like there's just, I mean, the only way I could release a product inside Microsoft was that I got one of my engineers from Microsoft to actually work on the Linux Orca screen reader and fix it himself and send it in as a pull request. And then we had to wait for 3 months for somebody to sign it off. And now we could release the Microsoft product, because that was the only browser screen reader thing that actually didn't work together. But it feels to me very frustrating that the assistive technologies are not moving as fast as the rest of the web.
Is there? I was trying to find out. Is there an interop for accessibility tools? Like that seems like that would be a really great initiative to try and normalize all the ones out there. And if we had like a project baseline for all the accessibility, all the various, because I mean, most of us know 3 or 4. You probably know all of them because of that history you have. But I bet most engineers probably know like 2. And
there's a can I use for them. There's a can I use for them for assistive technology, but there is no interop because they're all closed source. Like there's only one big open source one that's NVDA, and the others are basically just their business model was to be like, we're the only ones that can do it. And as in countries with healthcare, blind people get them paid for by the government. They actually dictated the prices, and they're like, why should we do a lot of stuff when we can make money anyways? It felt really, I fell out of the idea of speaking at accessibility conferences and stuff like that because of that. I felt really bizarre that it's like what we say when we say about accessibility, that you shouldn't block people out. The business model of a lot of these companies is basically like, well, you have to use us anyway, so screw you. And so it's really, really bad. Like,
so I think that's the frustration, I think, is like it would be. I think you would get more traction on an accessibility if it were more sort of standardized, and I think that has helped the HTML CSS movement is the interop. I think has done a lot, not only giving people, the engineers, the opportunity to vote on, this is what we'd love to see, but I think it's also just that that exposure, that transparency of the browsers of who supports what, and that little screen that every time a browser gets a point up from one of the other browsers, they have to publicize, oh, we got a 98, we got a 97. But I guess if the accessibility community doesn't have that type of openness or maybe caring, then that probably would never happen. But it just seemed to me like it should be more about, if I'm willing to use an abbreviation tag with the intent of trying to make my acronym more accessible, it's frustrating to me that none of the tools that would do that to my audience are actually using it. So I do still use them, but it just kind of felt like it was a little bit of a shiv in the back a little bit for that.
Well, that was always the thing about semantic HTML, is like what the code bros basically told us, like, well, it's not doing anything, so why do you put it in there? Like, and the whole like progressive enhancement, like, oh, you never just change the CSS, you change the whole thing. So why should you even care about not having CSS in JS and these kind of things? So it's like, just make like spaghetti code out of everything and hope the browser renders it fine. Because browsers have to be very forgiving and have to do everything to make sure you don't have something broken. But it's a really interesting thing that we're getting into a space where CSS and HTML can be applied, and if it doesn't do anything, it doesn't cost much, because I think semantic HTML, I've never seen too deep. I've seen DOM problems and like performance problems in the DOM only in HTML that wasn't semantic. 6,000 helper diffs and like spans and everything, rather than like, okay, you can actually use GSS generated content as a background as well. You don't need to put another div in there that you actually put the background in, these kind of things. So
the biggest challenge that I see on HTML is just the sheer volume of it on some commercial sites, some e-commerce sites especially. With Google's recent 15 down to 2 meg, I was sitting there thinking, who in the world has 2 megabytes of, and that's per file that it's crawling. So I thought, who in the world has more than 2 megabytes of HTML? And then I started looking at a few e-commerce sites. I was like, oh, quite a few people. And that just shocked me. Like, how many DOM nodes does that take to rack up 2 megabytes? Or, well, I guess they were crawling 15 megabyte before.
Well, it's also like lots of unreadable classes that basically get applied to it, like, all the things that basically get generated by React and these kind of things. I looked at X the other day, source code, because I wanted to write a scraper for it, because I don't want to link to it anymore. And basically, on the body element, it had like a JSON object with all the key codes, like all the keyboard shortcuts, as a lookup table. And that was basically on the body element of like, I mean, this is fun because I can edit it in developer tools and put other key codes in just only for myself, but it's still, it's just like the amount of people that use HTML as a database or as just something to store data halfway through or cache it there is just absolutely bonkers.
And all that markup before you ever get to any content, actual content, right? So you're just pushing your content further and further and further down the page. Yeah. I remember that when data attributes first came out, I looked at that kind of like, okay. I like the functionality of it. I like being able to, okay, this is what's in this component, and these are sort of variables or options or whatever might happen, and that's a useful place to hang this information. But I did feel the same way, like, does that information really belong right here? Does it belong hooked on in these little bits? And that's another thing you see a tremendous amount in like React type projects, right? Where you got data attribute spaghetti now, where it's just, okay, we don't want to push all the props up and down, but we're just put everything in a data attribute so that you don't have to pass it back and forth. And there again, it's different. What works in one project, if it works, there might be a situation where that makes sense. But it tends to be once we do it one place, we think that's the way we should do it everywhere. So, but it just makes sense that maybe the markup bigger and bigger and bigger. So.
What I liked about data attributes was that it's also accessible to CSS. So you can actually do like, if it's over 100, make it red or these kind of things. Yeah. I think in 2012, I did a YouTube video that still gets a lot of clicks where I explain data attributes, and with a little game where it's like, if you're 100, then you're dead, and basically just do it in CSS because it's in there. But then you see people using data attributes and then using read attribute rather than the data set expando. Like, we have element.dataset that actually gives you already the data parsed, but people still do it in the DOM then, and you're like, well, you haven't understood at all what this is about, is it?
Well, we can't all know everything, right?
So what is one thing that you still need to use JavaScript for that you want the CSS world to tackle or the HTML world to tackle? What is one thing that you found that you can't do yet?
Well, I've never been a big fan of full client-side rendering. I absolutely love it as once the HTML has been delivered, rendered, going in and making the page interactive with it. And I think you still lack some of that there. But as far as separation of concerns, I feel like that still belongs that way. Once you learn for an e-commerce detail page, once that loads and you've got the shade of red on screen and somebody wants to see what it looks like in blue, a full page refresh for changing a couple of little bits of data and maybe swapping an image or two seems ridiculous. And so you have that with JavaScript would fetch the new data set and just replace those bits in the page. I'm still very much a fan of that. And I guess if you downloaded sort of everything, all the options, all the images and everything in the page, you could go back to what you're talking with the hidden input buttons where you would show and hide things. But now you're downloading, your entire catalog just so you can swap in page. But I think, that probably the client-side rendering type of stuff would be the biggest thing. And otherwise, it seems like where we are with HTML, as far as like design patterns and what you can do with CSS animations and that type of thing, there isn't a whole lot that I would track. That you've got the scrolling animation, and you've got view transitions, and you've got the carousels and parallax, and there's so much stuff that you can just do with straight up HTML, CSS, the modals, the interstitials, all of this. That I feel like majority it's becoming, unless you're making an app, unless you're doing like a RUM dashboard or something where you really want to be able to drag a slider and have everything just react exactly to your settings like that. Of course, that type of thing is going to remain firmly in JavaScript land, I think. I don't know. Maybe you can do some trickery with that too, where your SVG graph changes based on where your CSS range slider is. I don't know. But
I think Anna Tudor did stuff like that. She was always our test platform for Edge. Like whatever she wrote in CSS, we just ran the CSS engine against to see if it actually can do it. And it's just incredibly fascinating. I love, and I want to give a shout. Yeah, I want to give a shout out to those people. Like, right, we're finishing off now because we're already an hour in, and I think it's so amazing to have the Leah Varus, the Anna Tudors, and like so many more people out there that just push this and basically have fun with it. And it's so great to see these solutions coming out. And I think that's my call for this is like, you just NoLoJS because you wanted to. You had some time on your hand right now, and you basically said like, okay. And just do it. And if you don't get 10,000 GitHub stars in the first 5 minutes, like an insecure AI bot does, that's fine too. It's just, I have so much fun writing random stuff and just putting it out on GitHub. And then people emailing me 3 years later, that's exactly what I needed. This is basically what it's about. And thank you for doing that NoLoJS stuff, because
sure.
hopefully people can learn from it, and it would be great if we can actually wrap it into components of libraries so they don't actually rely on these things. Yeah. But that's a tough nut to crack.
We'll do the next podcast on that one.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Aaron. This was very insightful.
Good to see you again.
As we said, you can meet Aaron anywhere on the internet. We're going to link the stuff in the description here. Don't like and subscribe because we don't monitor that. But basically, and we have no sponsors, so sorry about that. Any last words for our audience, Aaron?
This was a lot of fun. I've been looking forward to doing this. Appreciate it.
Are you coming to the Congress in November?
We'll see if I get some funding between now and then, perhaps.
You can send a proposal and speak. How about that?
Maybe that'd be fun.
I know the person that reviews all of these things quite well. So
for me.
I will do my best. Thanks very much, Aaron Grogg.
Cheers,
this was Coffee with Developers for today. See you soon.
Thanks, Chris.